Hi there, good evening, and thanks for joining in. My name is Rick Griffith, and thanks for joining us for tonight's MCA Denver program. This program is basically born out of the exhibition which I've been a part of called Colorado in the Present Tense, which is located on the second floor of the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Denver, Colorado. And the particular part of my exhibit is called Tools. In this exhibit, I explore a number of different things that have to do with activism and nonviolence, and I thought I would invite some friends along to talk about this. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to check out the museum's YouTube channel for videos of the exhibition, and you might get a peek inside. You can also check out all the great programming at MCA coming up at mcadenver.org/events. If you have the means, please consider making a donation to support MCA Denver. They would normally charge $10 per head for an event like this if in person, and of course, any amount helps. Thanks for the support. I'd also like to just take a moment to be grateful myself for the support of the museum and the museum staff in all of the exhibit undertakings. And I have just a lot of appreciation and respect for their hard work. I'd like to invite at this point in time my guests, Evan Weissman and Stefan Brackett. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
As typical with my engagement and involvement in any sort of event like this, I like to spend the moment just acknowledging the land and acknowledging how we, the three of us, thrive, live, have our families, run our businesses, and do our daily work on the unceded territory of the Cheyenne, the Colorado Mountain Ute, the Wyandot, Shoshone, and Pawnee tribes. And, I bring this to our attention because their struggle is specific and real and is not over. And any attention that we draw to the struggle of the people of our First Nation brings us into a real relationship with not just the land, but also the people who have cared for this land, and also the people who are our brothers and sisters in this struggle. So I just want to take a moment to do that. And for anyone who's tuning in from another part of the United States, they are your First Nation too. And that's my reality. I hope we share that. I'm also going to take a moment to dedicate our evening to a person who is no longer with us, but has had a deep and meaningful effect on my life and perhaps the lives of many people. That's ridiculous. Many people who are in our geography and in our community, and that is Dr. Vincent Harding. Dr. Vincent Harding brought me to a real relationship with the freedom movement and has been a mentor for me and for my growth for 20 years. And he continues to be an influence in life and in his passing as well. And I know that you guys have a relationship with Dr. Vincent Harding as well. I affectionately call him Uncle Vincent, and for anyone who shares that, we should just be in that moment together. In the spirit of Dr. Vincent Harding, what I wanted to do was run this conversation in a way that was consistent with the way that he would have run a conversation. And that would have been to start it with an introduction. If I remember correctly, the introduction is your name, your mother's maiden name, the birthplace of your maternal grandmother, and a thought and a hope that you have for the world today. Does that seem accurate for you, Stefan? Yeah. And so I'm going to take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Rick Griffith. My mother's maiden name is Macmillan. And my grandmother's maiden name is Innes, and her origin is Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago in the British West Indies. Stefan?
Thank you for bringing Uncle Vincent into this conversation. It means a lot. It means a lot. So I am Stephen Brackett. My mother's maiden name is Malloy. And then my mama's maiden name is Dickerson. And they are from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That's where she was born. And a hope for the world is compassion fueled by a deep childlike curiosity.
Nice.
It's always fun to follow Stefan with some deep stuff. For my mama's mama, it's always a touch complicated for me because my mama's her name was Lillian Dovey Dave, and she was from a Jewish family that had recently moved to Asheville, North Carolina. However, so she gave birth to my mom, but she died a couple days later. So childbirth sort of took her, and so my grandfather needed help. He was not a child rearing man, and he ended up hiring a woman who was 71, who was estranged from her family and her son. Her name was Eliza Shelton. She was from Greenville, Georgia. And she was 100 when I was born. She died at 108. And her mother was the daughter of a slave. But so she raised my mom. And so that's why it's a little, I need to honor both of those women. And in terms of my hope for the world, I am constantly in search of and interested in the further invention of nonviolence, what that looks like, who that looks like, in what ways. And so that's why I'm excited to be talking with y'all tonight.
Thank you so much. My hope for the world right now is to get in touch with some more reality. In the words of Uncle Vincent, I think that getting more people in touch with love, getting more people in touch with the idea of forgiveness, and helping people understand that, like, these are technologies and these are concepts that Black people live with and have been thriving with for centuries, and that believing and knowing that will certainly go a long way to help us all communicate better and to fear each other less. The provocation that I start with on the side of activism is one that kind of takes me back to my years in Washington, D.C. I arrived in the United States in the mid-'80s, and my experience in the mid-'80s and the '90s was living in Washington, D.C., and then later on in New York. And I was watching my queer brothers and sisters die and maneuver through tremendous grief and pain during the denial years of the AIDS crisis. And this was my first experience with activism. I think that it was a really dark feeling. And I remember, with death in the atmosphere, that sometimes acting recklessly with our bodies and the police, there was somewhere in there like this ability to be like using the body as an instrument. And even though we resisted violence, I think what we did was we put ourselves in the path of another person's sort of expression. We were willing to sacrifice a certain amount of our young bodies to the moment. And violence might have been seen in some way as a virus that you might catch in the moment. But you didn't come to it with violence in your heart. You didn't come to it with an idea of doing damage. You just came to it with a sense of recklessness. And I wonder if any part of that seems true for you, or has been an experience that you guys have had, in that sense of not knowing that nonviolence is the goal, but knowing that violence wasn't the answer, even if you were reckless. Evan?
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I mean, I think for me, the thing that I, without knowing the words for it growing up, there was an idea of like, when you're pissed off and you want to pick up a rock and throw it, but like you have anger, and this could be yourself or like those around you or community, and that seems like everything is telling you that that's the right thing to do, and that would feel good because it does, and it also seems like it's going to work. That I think I think I experienced that, and I remember seeing that with other people that I grew up with, who were all wanting to sort of yell and smash things, you know, for different reasons, whether they be folks who were immigrants or refugees, or just kind of dealing with systemic racism or classism, whatever it is. But for me specifically, it was in, at least if we're talking about formative years, for me, it was very much had to do with being a Jew, where I was in a Jewish household, and I was in the wallpaper of my existence was Zionism, was this Jewish nationalism, is this is the way that we will protect ourselves, coming from parents who were you know, children of the Holocaust generation, but who grew up in the Jim Crow South as non-black, certainly, but not fully white. So the thing that they wanted was this. They wanted, like, how can we never let people mess with us? And the Jews that I was around were in Hebrew school and Sunday school. And I was fed this information of that this is how strength comes. And it comes by we get our own nation, and we will fight them. And look, this is what happened. We protect ourselves. But at the same time, I had more Muslim friends, and I had more Palestinian friends actually than I had Jewish friends in my everyday life. And those things didn't rub. And I think that is probably the tension between those things of what I now know, and we have words for, of privilege, and oppression and violence, or maybe I'd even say just like how you resist and what that looks like. That just showed up and was really powerful for me to see who controls narratives, who controls history. Yeah, I think that was really formative for me, if we're talking about the sort of early years, is how to, in kind of Jewish talk, how to wrestle with the power, to change things from what they are to what they could be, which is wrestling with God, which is Israel. How do you get to that idea? Can you ever get to a place that is wrestling with the power to change things? Yeah.
Speaking of wrestling, I would like to encourage our guests who are on the call with us to enter any question that they'd like to in the chat. We will disrupt our sort of convivial exchange for any curious questions that you guys have. And one of the things that, of course, when people don't introduce themselves completely and thoroughly, or have other people perform these introductions for them, you might not know exactly what kind of question you could aim at them. So I'll spend a moment and let you know that Evan Weissman is an activist in the Denver geography and has brought a number of fantastic ideas to the table for city council, has been an advocate for participatory budgeting in our state and in our local mechanics. He's also been a deep, how can I put it? He's been a really great collaborator in the sense of bringing people together for what's called a Civic Health Club called Warm Cookies for the Revolution. And so Evan has got plenty of experience in the area of activism and community building, and also has been a recipient of a tremendous amount of grant monies with which he has experimented with various formats of civic engagement for other people too. I'll take a moment and just say Stephen Brackett is Brer Rabbit of the Flowbots and a founding member and former board member of what was called flowbots.org and is now called, gosh, why have I forgotten the name of the nonprofit again?
Youth on
Record.
Thank you. Youth on Record, now called Youth on Record, which is an organization that has turned the Denver Public Schools scenario of truancy and rewarding young people with musical instruction and mentorship as an exchange for attendance in high school and for community engagement and mentorship of other young people as well. So it's a beautiful circular economy of mentorship and caring. All of us being led by the same person, I think that one of the interesting things that we could talk about is the possibility of seeing music as a healing technology. And I know that Stefan's got plenty of ideas around that. Would you like to share?
Absolutely. How long do I have? No, but for real, like in honoring Uncle Vincent specifically, as a musician, Uncle Vincent was somebody who's been a mentor of mine since I was in third grade and continued to be like an anchor point of my development as an active artist, as an activist, as a Black man surviving in Denver, all of these things. And so as a great mentor, he would show up at all of our very well-meaning but really poorly planned actions, workshops, trainings, and he would be there, which is incredible. And unlike a lot of mentors, during that time, like his main piece of critique would always be, my brothers, where are the songs? And it was being asked so consistently, I didn't know what he meant. It's like, what? Fight with Tools just went gold. Like, what do you mean, where are the songs? But it was after he passed that I truly understood the agitation that he was putting forward. He was like, why aren't you all singing? When you are at these actions, when you're at these workshops, why aren't you using this piece of technology that we used that gave us great power in situations where the author would have written us powerless? And after really understanding the provocation, we did a deep dive, Jamie, Laurie, and myself, into what does that mean? Where are the songs? And we had to start approaching songs as technology, because that's what you do when you've forgotten how to use a practice that is yours. That's what you do in order to express the value of something, of a practice that is like fallen out of usage. Because we were at the point where we were going to actions and rallies and people were like, well, we don't sing those slave songs anymore. Right? Somehow it had become an association with powerlessness because the lineage of power had broken through without practice. And it's not, we named our first album Fight with Tools. We named our first nonprofit organization Fight with Tools because we were very literally trying to look for the different mechanisms, skill sets, and sets of expertise that allowed us to win. And as what Uncle Vincent was saying, songs are a huge part of that. Now, when I say songs are technology, I mean, you all might be like, okay, what does that mean? It's like, well, here's something that a song can do. If you are reading a book, it can take up to 60 to 150 pages for you to read it and change your emotional state. A movie might be able to do it in 2 hours. A song can do it in 1 minute. It's a piece of technology that allows a group of people to go through an emotional state shift deliberately in the same period of time. If you have a group of people who are mourning the loss of somebody who was murdered by the police, and you want to get them from sadness to power, there are songs for the Southern Freedom Movement that can do that in 90 seconds. That kind of technology we need. If we're talking about nonviolence, so one of the things that we're talking about nonviolence is people often get it mixed up. Nonviolence is still a show of power. It is still a show of force. But in order for that to be a show of force and power, we need to do it together. if I want everybody to be on the same messaging, I can like maybe send out a few tweets, airdrop a bunch of people, take them at a time, or we can sing one song and we can all get on the same breath and get in the same emotional proximity around the same message that actually resonates with us without us having to vet every single piece of it through our intelligence, right? So it's a beautiful way to strike where the armor isn't. So that's why like we see so many movements using songs, and not just songs. So many of the arts are actually the soft connective tissue that allow people to come together. So a lot of times with professional modern activists, people get together, but nobody has food. Guess what? They didn't do that in the Southern Freedom Movement. The Black Panther Party had food there. The workers, like the farm workers, they had food. It's another culinary art is a way to bring people together and show they're being provided for. Song, dance, all of these things are incredible tools that have worked for hundreds of years. And in a very real way, we need them now more than ever. And I have to say that anytime that I've stepped into a space and tricked people into singing, that room got tighter very quickly. So
Right.
it doesn't fail. It doesn't fail. And I'm telling you, like Rick, Evan, I've been on tours throughout the most conservative parts of the plains, and I've gotten people getting together singing freedom songs in a super conservative church in like 10 minutes. Like that piece of technology we need, and it's necessary. And yeah, it's part of the glue.
It's so interesting that you mentioned Uncle Vincent's "Where Are the Songs?" because I remember him saying that too. For those of you guys who don't know Dr. Vincent Harding, I will not do his biography any justice whatsoever, but I will say this. One of the most important things ever said by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was written by our dear departed Uncle Vincent, and it was the Beyond Vietnam speech. The Beyond Vietnam speech was a shift in thinking about not just domestic, but also including concepts of foreign policy. It was not common for the freedom movement to have a gesture into the foreign policy of the United States. And this one particular argument, and I suggest you find it and have a read. It's available all over the internet. But his rhetoric in this particular address was so powerful. And it also gives a sense of grounding to priorities, right? And I think that whether or not someone actually understands war to be terrorism, which is, I remember him wearing that button all of his life that just says war is terrorism. You still can't argue with the idea that people are terrorized by war and that war on foreign soil is a deprioritization of your actual national agendas, which would be to care for the people who live in your geography. So Evan, I've got a question for you, and I know it might sound super simple, but what is nonviolence?
Yeah, that's I'll just give you that'll sum that up in 10 seconds. No, a lot of people have tried to do that for a long time. I would say, as it relates to this conversation, and just in general, nonviolence is a horrible word. Start with that. It doesn't seem to work, and no one's been able to come up with the right word, including the beautiful practitioners of it. But I would say, for most people's minds, that if violence is here and nonviolence is here, doing nothing is a mile that way, or I'd say that way. So violence and nonviolence are very, very similar in that they're about resistance, they're about instigating conflict, they're about pushing for change. And but I'd say that the way that I like to think about it, especially as it relates to one's life, activism, and art, is that there's, and this comes pretty much straight from Gandhi. Gandhi talked about a constructive program and an obstructive program. So if you think about Gandhi's movement, or you think about the civil rights movement, you think about getting arrested committing civil disobedience, these things that are saying, no, we are not doing this anymore. We're not following these laws. These are unjust laws. We are not playing this game. The things that say no are obstructing the system. And that's one bit of nonviolence. And that often uses tools and tactics and strategy to do so. And then there's the other side, which is the constructive program, which is, what is the world we want? And how do we create that now? And how do we resist horrible institutions and forces and build up new ones and live it now? And so I would say that those are the two main, for me, the two main tenets of nonviolence are resisting evil, resisting injustice, resisting these things without hating. And well, that might be a little much, but without using or replicating the violence that is taken. So it does take a little bit of being shock absorbers, a little bit, but it's mostly about creativity and creatively resisting violence. That's the best I'm going to give you at the moment, I think.
What I've found in my experience was that when I was 19 and 20 years old, I didn't have a lot of boundaries around my body. And so when someone said nonviolent, I basically just experienced not violent thought or action. And I promoted not violent thought or action. As I'm older, I couldn't even survive the same actions, even though they're nonviolent. I couldn't necessarily participate in the same way. And so my sense of nonviolence has also become this kind of mechanism by which I view inclusivity, where if everyone is safe, or if everyone is participating in the world in a way that makes it safer, right? To your note about making the world that you want to be in, if everyone is safe, then more people can get involved. It's the moment that people feel not safe that sort of starts to take away from the types of participants that are able to be in that action. Young people who are quick, like that's the start. And then, of course, people who are differently abled can't participate in any of these events if there is fear for their safety and that they have to be in whatever way cared for by the community. And it takes more people to sort of do that work. And in a moment of urgency, more people are in danger at that point in time. And so I always looked at it through the lens of inclusivity in my old age, with the same sort of aggression and the same upset, but with less of a sort of physical expression of that, much more of a mental expression, much more of a making tools instead of using my black body and putting it in the path of put it in danger in order to be in this resistance. Stefan, do you want to share anything on that?
Yeah. In all of these situations, I kind of think that in some ways, one of the differences is like, how is, I'll just use for example, like in my case, like how is the black body being valued? For me, a violent action requires that I reduce somebody's value to not being worthy of existing. Like they can be removed, they can be excused, which is just a replication of the violence that has been visited upon any kind of marginalized identity. I feel like nonviolence is actually adhering and asserting that there is a value to everybody's personhood that is outside of the exchange that is normally done in this country. And so in this way, that's why I look at Erica Chenoweth's research, and we see, because she was trying to prove that violent actions are just as successful as nonviolent ones. But through her research, she found that nonviolent actions are 25.7% more effective. But the reason is nonviolent actions are more inclusive. Like you were talking about, Rick, it's like violent acts, like physically reducing somebody else's value requires a certain fitness ability, strength, all of these things. The nonviolent actions of Gandhi or any of these people that we're talking about can actually include children, people of all different types of ability. And like you're using that to get to a massive point where we're saying like we are insisting upon making this safe. We get to the point where we get 3.4% of the population and you can overturn violent dictatorships. That's the magic number that Erica Chenoweth came up with, that she found in her research. So it just kind of just goes to prove that like we actually need everybody to be safe to win. We need to be able to change the statements of values for all participants in order for us to win. And the challenge, the beautiful challenge of that collaboration is finding ways to make sure that we're hearing the voices and making spaces for people to be powerful, to change that value of marginalization. And yeah, in so many different ways, I'll say this again, the arts are one of the hidden tools in this common culture that we forget. We forget that like these are some of the ways that people's voices can be brought to the fore in an organic way, in a participatory way, in a way that makes everybody visible.
And if I can add to that, I think that it's been a beautiful thing that people like Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan and other folks who more recently are doing the nerdy data studies to see what works and what doesn't. And it has put the onus on proving that violence works on advocates of violence, which means most of us, that is the common denominator that we all swim in and we grow up with, which is like, yeah, I'll try that. I will try everything I can, but if that doesn't work, if all else fails, I'm going to be violent. And it has this assumption that works. And so I think that that's important, but I'll speak up for something else, which prior to a lot of the data was how people sort of argued for nonviolence and not in just a philosophical way, but have gotten people throughout time and throughout cultures to resist nonviolently. One is because it just made sense, because if you have less power, if you have less guns, if you have less might in that way, then that's all you have to use. But you have power, you have people power. But it's something that, actually, when Dr. King gave the Beyond Vietnam speech, one of the first things he said that Uncle Vincent wrote is basically that his conscience is compelling him to speak out. He can't be silent any longer. And so I'm making a plug for a feeling, which is not data. I'm making a plug for some intrinsic moral value, something that humans share that is really important to nonviolent resistance and is what has motivated many people, from the lone single person standing on a corner who says, I'm not standing for this anymore, to mass mobilizations, which is not obeying if you believe in your core that something is wrong. And I think that that's something that people who resist violently or nonviolently share. And my hope is that we have more people in the world who are willing first to say, I resist. And then we need to figure out the effectiveness piece, and we need to figure out strategy. But we do need more people to say, I'm not playing.
Right. No. If I lean back into my very favorite thing to ever talk about, which is generally science fiction, and if I lean back into the mythology of the Planet of the Apes, and if I lean back into this notion of everything comes from the great canine and feline plagues of the 80s and 90s, when man decided to have non-upright primates as pets, and then one non-upright primate said the very first word, and that word was no. And if you take that into the Planet of the Apes film, into the very first one with Charlton Heston, everyone is surprised when he speaks because most humans are mute. And the reason why we have this construction is because what would be the first word that humans would have if they were mute and if they were enslaved? It'd be no. And of course, for him, it was this fairly complex address of, get your damn hands off me, you damn dirty ape. You know, but it's a no of sorts, and it's a dramatic reference point to the idea of resistance being literally a voice. Most of my community in the printer space will always know that I'm a huge advocate for knowing the origin of the Bill of Rights, and my story about the origin of the Bill of Rights comes from the 1643 parliamentary edict that said that all printing presses must be licensed in the UK. And John Milton wrote an Areopagitic oratory in 1644, the year after, to petition Parliament for the delicensure of printing presses, because he had a gripe with the newly formed Anglican Church, which was run by the, at the time, monarch, and also the head of Parliament. And so all of these things come together to sort of divine the beginning of the Bill of Rights by saying that we have a right to have a grievance, we have a right to freedom of religion, regardless of whether or not the country is held captive by a particular religion. And we also have the right to have unlicensed printing presses. Now, he didn't get this wish for 50 years after 1644. But the idea that he stood up and said no, because there is no justice in a place that like assumes that libelous action is going to be taken with a printing press, that ultimately we have to use these printing presses to speak truth. This whole idea is the cornerstone of resistance, and it's also the cornerstone of the Bill of Rights, which is our ability to resist without fear of being destroyed as a person or having your personhood destroyed. I want to take a moment also and saying to Tucker, who's in the chat, that identifying as a Black man and a differently abled person and knowing that your approach has to be nonviolent, I would just say that that's true of the young people that we want to have involved as well, as long as we don't believe in putting our young people in harm. It's also true of our women. It's also true of our entire community, is that we have to figure out a framework through which we can all participate, because it's through every voice being involved that we get this kind of what Evan calls people power, right?
And I would just, Stan, do you want?
Well, I just wanted to say real quick, there's like, with that beautiful thing about the Bill of Rights, it's just, I think it's really important to think of like most of the things that we consider to be genres in music started as acts of resistance. So many different groups like were forced to come up with their own expression because they were denied access beforehand. But the issue is, and it's one of the things I didn't say before, there is a difference. When Uncle Vincent was saying, where are the songs? He wasn't talking about songs that we were putting on the marketplace. He was talking about songs that were crafted for a very different purpose, that were being used not necessarily to highlight the author, but were to highlight the power of the people. It's a different format. And I feel as though like within these things, like our genres, which were usually acts of resistance, like even the ballet, when back in the day in the ballet, like the dancers would lead the French Revolution. Like the ballet dancers would be out in the streets first and foremost. But after a while, a marketplace develops, and then these things no longer become acts of resistance. But when we are using the arts to pivot from the marketplace to the people, we get an opportunity for them to speak in a whole different way and a different type of power. So I just wanted to kind of like add that little kind of genealogy. If we look at a lot of our modern movements, like from country music to punk to funk, which is largely depoliticized when we think about it, all of these things like had their roots in kind of saying like, this is how we are speaking about our world and our validity and power. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah. I was just going to say to Rick's point, which is expounding upon, again, what's been sort of proven to work, this idea of, how can you get it? So it's going to be more successful if your grandma can take part and if kids can take part and all these things. And that is 100% true. And I also, this is in addition to that, is I think, we talk a lot about, and I've talked with Stefan about this before, I know, is we talk about consent. There's a lot of talk about consent amongst, if you're going to have sort of sexual relations with someone and how important that is. But what kind of consent is there in our activism? Because I would also say that what is very powerful and has been powerful are folks from lots of different communities who consent to putting themselves in harm's way a lot. And I'm thinking of, just right here in Denver with the Atlantis community and Adapt and the Gang of 19 pushing forward in such strident ways and putting literally their bodies on the line and getting out of wheelchairs and whatnot. And young people all over the world who gave up their lives in struggle. And so I think that I just, not that Rick was saying this, but just I didn't want anyone to take from this that any of the people who are outside of some notion of I don't know, average or normal or common, if I didn't want anyone to think that is something we hold up, that actually if people consent to doing these things, taking risk is a huge part of nonviolence, and overcoming fear is a huge part, but it's a very different thing to put that upon someone else. And the more you can lower barriers so you don't need to do that is going to prove successful.
I think that I can share my screen. It kind of brings, let me see if I can. Share screen. I'm going to try this out for a second, just to introduce folks to this concept. 2 monitors, share screen. Yeah, sure. Let's see what happens. Share screen too. Okay, done. So this right here is, when we talk about more people getting involved, this is a tool that I made last year that I wanted people to share. And there's one reason why I made this tool, and that is because I think that if people want to know what's the best thing that they can do, is that they can be inventive enough to create consequences for racist behavior in their atmosphere, in the spaces that they share with other people. And when I say people, I mean not just Black people, because part of my logic in making this instrument, and hopefully someone will put a link in the chat because it's available for free. Part of my intention here is to give white people and allies tools through which to make the place that they want to be as well. And if Black people continue to take the burden of creating consequences, then Black people are going to get killed creating consequences. And this is this goes against the idea that we are doing this together. When people say we're in this together, one of the ways that we are in this together is if there are other people creating consequences for racism in my atmosphere besides me. And I'm hoping, and it's my sincere hope, that people want this atmosphere to be less bigoted, and they don't favor white solidarity over humanity, and that there will be a way that all allies can participate in this kind of movement forward. But the first thing to do is to say, I'm prepared to create consequences for people who behave in a certain way in my home, in my business, in my atmosphere, in any place that I share. And so I made this, and maybe there's a question about like how this might work, or maybe there are some thoughts about what some next steps might be in this conversation, because I think that this is a very easy sort of push into the space, and I don't think it's doing any of the heavy lifting at all. I think it's much more like the tool that you would lift to deploy, and with some creativity, of course.
It makes me think. Well, are you looking for a comment from other people, or can I?
Sure.
Okay. It makes me think a little bit about. So a big part of nonviolence is this idea that that the ends are contained within the means that you use. And that's sometimes confusing language. Usually when you hear means and ends, people think, you may have heard about like Machiavelli, the ends justify the means. This idea that like whatever we need to do to get there, it made sense. You had me chained up. I needed to kill you. It made sense because now I'm not chained up or whatever it is. But for nonviolence, the idea is more like baking bread, that in your ingredients, if you put the flour and the water and the yeast and whatever else in there, before you put it in the oven, if you put sand in there, then that is what you're going to get with the bread. And so the thing that's making me think about is the means, the ends that we're seeking, if they are contained within the means that you're using, when we're making art or we're creating actions, such as what you just showed, if you're creating a space, that's what you're doing, is that you're saying the world that we are working towards, we need to have it now. It needs to be lived. It needs to be in the institutions, in our private life. It all needs to be here right now. If we want to get there into the future, we can't have them be separate.
Evan, we have a question in the chat that says, can you talk about nonviolent consequences? What? So given this call to create consequences for people who are racist, like, are there ways to think about these consequences that are nonviolent but also creative? I mean, what's your initial thought?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, and hopefully I'm not going down the wrong path, so Jess or Rick or Stefan, stop me, but I'm thinking about there are different forms of justice. Like there are people who think about different forms of justice systems. So people talk about transformational justice or restorative justice, but an idea that if you break the law, the rule, the code, if you make a harm, if you have inflicted harm on someone, that there are ways to ask different questions than the way our system does now. Our system now is like, who broke the law? What's the punishment? Who did it? And what's their punishment?
Right, and there are punishments that are available.
Yeah, and we use it also in a way where like victims aren't really a part of it. It's the state versus Evan Weissman for doing what I did, and the victim's not a part of it. So there are ways that we can conceive of and think about consequences that are saying, okay, hold on, what harm was done, by whom and to whom, and whose responsibility is it to fix that harm? Though if you ask different questions, then you're going to get different answers. Usually that's not going to involve locking someone up for the rest of their life and not talking to the person who the harm was done to. It's able to see gray zones a little bit more. It can involve those things if you wanted, but I think nonviolent consequences would be, would look something like that, would be still seeing the humanity in everyone involved and not pushing anyone aside, whether that be a victim or a perpetrator. That you're basically saying we still have to live in a community together. And so what do we want that to look like? Hopefully that has anything to do with what you were just asking, Jess.
I think that sounds about right. I think that the question is, what is a nonviolent consequence? And I think that asking people to live in your community with you, and that your community values more people than it does a cheap joke, I think that is a really important thing to say. It takes some courage to say so, but the more people that take the time to say it, the better off that community will be. Like right now in the moment, I think that like some such moment for me has looked like a lot of different things, but I would just say, thanks for sharing. However, I think that joke really has at its center some victims. And I would rather not like engage in humor that has victims. And you should know that I love Black people, or I have deep love and respect for some Black people, and this has made them victims. And therefore, this is unacceptable in my community. Or you could say the same thing for Asian people and so forth. But to help someone understand that there is a community requirement here is the very beginning of it. having this poster, or having it's available in a coaster format as well, you know, having this coaster sitting underneath a glass that has alcohol in it. I've had someone who's been using these coasters step in and say to me, this was amazing, because it totally changed the atmosphere when we were sitting down and having drinks with friends. They literally saw it through the bottom of their glass, read it, and it became the conversation. And it became the way that they made a shared safe space for each other. It's the way that they came into community with each other. So I think that it's kind of one of those things. It's going to take a lot of courage no matter what, Jess. But I do think that that courage is for you to speak your particular truth in the moment, and to practice that, and to be thinking about it in a way that says, wait, no, I do have a Black person that I love. I do have an Asian person that I love. There is definitely something at stake for me in this place. And I want to correct it for my own sense of community in this moment, so that I can continue to be in community with someone. But I will say this, the tool itself, the instrument itself, is one of prevention. It is one of prevention. Because when people have not established rules in spaces, then anything goes. And especially under conditions where people are altered, anything goes. And so by putting this in the atmosphere and saying there will be consequences, whether it's ejection or firms talking to, you know, that changes the atmosphere almost automatically. And it also creates a place where Black people and Asian people and Jewish people and anyone who's been marginalized by racist action, where they can go and say, you know what? This is a place where I can feel safe, because I don't have to carry all of this by myself. And I think that that's a really important feature of that tool. Thank you so much for asking. Is there a source that you recommend for resistance songs for group singing? Oh my goodness. What have you got? Bring it on, Bray Rabbit.
Yeah, I was looking at the chat, and I was seeing that, like, there is an issue when we come together and we sing the songs, and if we want to start singing the songs that have worked in the past, but then like, oh, well, this lyric is this, or this is this, or nobody of the identity that this song came from is going to be leading it. What do we do now? And so, like, I've encountered all of those things, and I'm not going to say it's complicated. I just think it's actually like a matter of etiquette. And do you have people kind of like signing up and signing on to the songs? Like, because there's the big controversy with the inauguration with J-Lo singing "This Land Is Your Land," right? Because like at first pass, that song seems to be entirely about colonialism, but then there's a fourth verse that's talking specifically about like people who've been displaced and land ownership and the tyranny of it and all those things. So all of this goes to say, I don't think, and thank goodness there isn't, I don't think that there's any one place that will find songs that work for everybody, because it actually requires us to be in the room and be in community with folks and have a discussion about the songs that we sing. So in the same way, if there was any songs that we were singing that came from the Water Defenders, we were singing that song because we had direct permission from a person who was there who said it was okay for us to do it. And in that same way, like, I just feel like knowing why and who's given you permission to sing these songs is actually the beautiful way to actually directly connect with the lineage of movement in the right alignment, in a way society doesn't teach you to do it. But but like after having done it for years and years and years, there's a kind of consensus and consent that you need to build with the room that you're working with to do it. The other thing that really helps is writing your own songs. So, and I'm not saying that everybody's got to be like an incredible songwriter, but most of the songs that we sing from the Southern Freedom Movement have already been remixed because they came from spirituals. And so keeping your hand on the freedom plow became eyes on the prize, right? You kept the melody, you changed the word for the times. Believe it or not, you can do that with anything. It's actually a time for you to re-co-opt all the music that's been like streamed into your face and take a Taylor Swift song and make it into a freedom song. Do it right then and there. Like, take this stuff back. That's how all this stuff has worked. And I got to tell you, like, there's an activity that we do called the Sing Down, where I can get rooms of people, some of them not even speaking the same language, and like two different teams just go back and forth, just singing songs they can sing, just singing the choruses. And at first, you're like, oh, that's not going to go very long. And I've been in rooms where it's gone on for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I've had to stop because we had to get to other things. So there is a bit of a common cultural framework that we believe doesn't exist, but we can tap on that and remix it. And if you're doing that with the people, then you have buy-in. So I do think that you can take songs from the past, but it doesn't mean you have to keep the words either. So if there's a certain song, if you're not down with This Land, change it to update it. Give it the word it needs for your people and your time and your emotional need. You are a part of the lineage of the folk singing of songs of freedom. So I'm sorry I can't give you just like one place to go to, but I do think you should consider yourself a writer, and the people in the room can be writers as well. And you'd be surprised. In 10 minutes, you can remix a bunch of songs and come away with at least 10 songs that you can sing together right then and there. So, like,
I do have,
consider yourself somebody who can contribute.
I have one place. This is with everything that Stefan just said as like the overarching theme, but some people who are doing contemporarily. So it might be just for reference, depending on who you are. Is the Black Joy Experience. They have published some things, both mixtapes, but also you can see lyrics, and a lot of they've done exactly what Stefan's talking about. And so I'd say support them and see whether or not you use them is a different thing. And Meg, I see your comment. I don't know that we have time, but I would love to respond to your comment at some point. So maybe we can trade emails or something.
I think we've got a moment. I think maybe this is how we wrap it up. I think it's super important to speak to this. My immediate response is to say that nonviolence defines yourself. It doesn't define your opponent. And I believe that like how we carry ourselves through any particular moment has a tremendous amount of power. And it is not the power to destroy, but it is actually a creative power. And so I respond to people who say, in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent has to have a conscience. No, in order for nonviolence to work, I have to stand in my commitment and have all the courage to continue to stand in that commitment in spite of what is thrown at me, in spite of what is present. And effectiveness is about my own effectiveness in my own community and how I can keep people safe by behaving in a safe way. And the effectiveness of my adversary is not my job, right? So I'm not in a relationship with that person. I'm in a relationship with the issue. And the way that I speak to the issue is in a way that is consistent with me. And so I do appreciate that there is this tension between like, who is your adversary and what does your adversary believe? But I also refute that. And I live inside of my own truth and my own like sort of framework of ethical action. Wrap it up. You want to bring it home, Evan, real quick?
Well, I was just going to say, I'll try to keep it really short, but I think, well, one, yes, nonviolence fails, just like violence fails. They both fail, and they're both, you have to sort of weigh them the same. Nonviolence is a bit of a wager, you might say. But I will say that throughout time, there have been horrific dictators, people who I think it's easy to say through their work and policies that they don't have a conscience. And nonviolence has always or often been tried, and it has been successful. And there's a lot of literature out there that sort of shows the different ways. So I'm talking about Hitler. I'm talking about there was lots of nonviolent resistance against Hitler that was very effective and that worked. And you can pretty much most anyone you can name of these horrific, brutal people, it can work. And I would also say that you have to know too that nonviolence is something that is maybe a bit more holistic, and that when is the time to act. So it's one thing to say, okay, I just pulled the trigger. The bullet is now almost at your nose. What are you going to do non-violently? Well, what are you going to do violently? There's nothing really that you can do in that situation. What can you do way back there? Why did the person have the gun? Why are they shooting it at you? What are the things that have gotten us to the place where someone is shooting? And so how can we work on those things now? How are we working on hatred and oppression for people right now who are undocumented in this country, or folks who are transgender, or pick a group of people that are being demonized? We need to work on those things now, because at some point it becomes too late. That's my quick response to that.
Thank you so much. Stefan, do you have a final thought?
Yeah, actually, I think Evan kind of dropped the mic on everybody though. But in that in that same way, it's also, I think it's really important to kind of think about, like, what do we mean by it not being effective? Because, like, let's also be real about, like, what does the pie chart even of a violent action look like? Like, what's all the in between? What does it look like when people are sitting together and eating and talking? Like, there's so much of the main in between points of any kind of culture that are nonviolent. We're setting up the preconditions, period. So I think in many ways, like, if we're looking at it like the person in front of the gun, all right, there's less choices. But if we are creative and we're looking at all the other ways in which we can prepare ourselves and our societies, then there's a lot of options and there's a lot of choices. And it would be sad for us to throw away our power in that moment and not be very deliberate about what we can build and what kind of future building we can make in those moments in that time, always. And so for me, I feel like in general, nonviolence is also a thing about being very deliberate and knowing how much power we have in a present moment and using it.
Gosh, thank you so much. We're about 6 minutes over. I did want to take a moment to say that while tonight's event was dedicated to Dr. Vincent Harding, our dear friend and mentor, we also dropped a new print tonight, which is basically for Brother Jeff's Cultural Center in Five Points, Denver. And this print is available through the MCA store. And you can register you can pre-order it if you'd like to with the email at shop@mcadenver.org. And it's $30 for one print. And there are 25 prints available in this edition. And so with that being said, I want to say the exhibition Tools is now on view at MCA until August 22nd. You can get tickets to attend in person, and you can get a glimpse at the digital gallery on MCA's website at mcadenver.org. And if you want to hit that red button down there to subscribe to MCA's programming, we'd be very, very grateful for that. I am grateful for the support that the museum has shown myself, and I'm really grateful for my friends Evan and Stefan for joining me this evening. Please have a safe and productive evening. Thank you so much for joining in. Bye now.